The gravy was still steaming when my mother smiled at me across the Christmas table and said the house was finally gone. "We closed on your grandma's place last month," she said, swirling her wine. "You were never in the will anyway." My sister laughed into her napkin. Good. She'd just wasted on that little office of hers. 11 faces turned to watch me crumble. I didn't. None of them knew the deed to that farmhouse already had a name on it, sitting in my purse beside my chair. And in about 90 seconds, that name was going to turn Christmas dinner into the quietest room in the county. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people meet impossible families and answer with quiet steel instead of screaming. If a story has ever made you set down your coffee and whisper, "Good for her," you're in the right place. My name is Simone Finch. I'm 34, and I keep books for the farms around Cedar Hollow. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. To explain how I ended up at that table holding a deed, I have to go back almost a year. It was a Tuesday in February, and I was reconciling the Hartley dairy ledgers when the call came. My grandmother, Opal, had taken a bad turn in the night. I was the one they called. I was always the one they called. Not my mother, who lived 20 minutes across town. Not my sister Brooke, who lived even closer. Me, because for 8 years I had been the one driving out to the farmhouse on Cedar Hollow Road with her pills, her tax forms, her groceries, and a thermos of coffee for the long mornings. I closed the laptop, left a note on the office door, and drove out past the frozen fields. Opal was propped up in her bed when I got there. Smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She held my hand for a while and didn't say much. Then she reached into the drawer of her nightstand and pressed a small key into my palm. It was the key to an old tin recipe box she'd kept in the kitchen since before I was born. "When the time comes," she said, "you'll know where to look." I asked her what she meant. She just patted my hand and told me to drink my coffee before it went cold. I tucked the key into my coat pocket and didn't think much of it. I figured she was tired, talking the way old people talk when the medicine makes the edges soft. I was wrong about that, the way I was wrong about a lot of things that year. But I wouldn't understand any of it until the house was already sold. That farmhouse was the only place I ever felt like I belonged. I grew up in town, in my parents' tidy ranch house where every conversation felt like a performance review. But summers, I belonged to Opal. She taught me to snap beans on the porch and to read a feed bill so the co-op couldn't pad it. She'd spread the farm's receipts across the kitchen table and let me add the columns out loud. "Numbers don't lie, Simone," she'd say. "People do. So you learn the numbers." That kitchen was where I decided what I'd be. I opened Finch & Co. bookkeeping at 22, in a rented room above the hardware store, because my parents wouldn't help with college, and Opal slipped me her egg money to make rent. My mother thought it was beneath us. My sister thought it was boring. Opal thought it was the finest thing anyone in the family had ever done. While I was driving out there every week, my mother came twice a year, mostly to ask about the value of the land. Brooke came for holidays and left early. I'm not telling you this to sound like a martyr. I'm telling you because of something Opal said the last good autumn we had together, sitting in her garden with dirt under both our fingernails. She looked at the house, then at me, and said it plain. "This place goes to the one who stayed." I laughed it off. I told her not to talk like that. She had years left. She didn't argue. She just smiled the way she did when she knew something I didn't, and went back to her tomatoes. I should have asked her what she meant. I didn't. I thought we had time. Opal passed in her sleep 3 days after she gave me that key. The funeral was on a gray Saturday, and I planned all of it. I picked the hymns she liked, ordered the flowers, wrote the obituary, and stood at the door thanking neighbors who'd known her 60 years. My mother, Sharon, wore black and accepted condolences like a queen receiving subjects. My father, Raymond, stood beside her and said almost nothing, which was his whole personality. Brooke spent the reception on her phone. I noticed, because you notice things when grief makes everything too loud and too quiet at the same time. What I remember most is the math. Not the grief, the math. At the reception, before the casseroles were even cold, my mother leaned over and asked me what I thought the farmhouse would fetch. I thought I'd misheard her. Then Brooke drifted through the house with her camera up, photographing the hutch, the quilts, the old grandfather clock, narrating prices under her breath like she was at an estate sale already. "That clock's worth something," she said. "And the land, Mom. The land is the real money." My father examined his shoes. Nobody asked who would feed Opal's old barn cat. Nobody asked where her garden tools should go. They asked what it was worth. I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, by the tin box she'd told me about, and felt something cold settle in my chest. I told myself it was grief. I told myself families get strange around death, that they didn't mean it the way it sounded. I thought the hardest part was already behind me, that nothing could hurt worse than losing her. I was wrong. The hardest part hadn't started yet. It started with a phone call about a will. In April, my cousin Wade called a family meeting to read the will. Wade Cobb is my mother's side, a part-time notary who runs a tax and title shop 2 towns over, and always smells faintly of cigarettes and cologne. The meeting wasn't at a lawyer's office. It was at my parents' kitchen table, with a coffee cake and a folder. That should have been my first clue. Wade put on his reading glasses and announced that Opal had left everything: the house, the land, the accounts, to my mother. "The dutiful daughter-in-law," he read, "who cared for me in my final years." My mother dabbed her eyes. Brooke squeezed her hand. My name was not in the document at all. Not as a beneficiary, not as a witness, not even as a footnote. "You were never in the will anyway, honey," my mother said, and there was the faintest curl at the corner of her mouth. I sat very still. I am good at sitting very still. But inside, 2 things were screaming at me. The first was that "dutiful daughter-in-law" was a phrase Opal would have rather choked on than written. She and my mother had circled each other like cats for 30 years. The second was the signature. I'd seen my grandmother sign 100 documents. This signature was careful, even, steady. The Opal I'd buried couldn't hold a spoon those last weeks, let alone sign her name clean. And the date typed at the bottom said, "This will was made just 3 weeks before she died." 3 weeks. I didn't say any of that out loud. I thanked Wade for his time, took a slice of coffee cake I didn't eat, and drove back to my office with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind doing arithmetic. Here is the thing about being the family bookkeeper. People assume you only count what they hand you. They forget you also notice what's missing. That night, I sat at my desk and laid out everything I knew, the way Opal taught me to lay out a ledger. 2 years earlier, I'd driven her to an attorney's office in the county seat. She'd told me she was getting her affairs in order and made me wait in the lobby, which was very like her. She came out an hour later with a sealed envelope and a business card she tucked into her purse. I never saw the documents, but I knew they existed. So how did a will drafted by a real estate attorney 2 years ago become a will notarized by Wade 3 weeks before she died? Wills can be updated, sure, but Opal hadn't left that house in 6 months. She couldn't have driven to Wade's office, and Wade hadn't set foot at the farmhouse. I'd have known. I called him the next morning and asked, plainly, when exactly Grandma had signed the new will. He got vague fast. "She had me come by," he said. "Last-minute change of heart. Happens all the time, Simone." I asked who witnessed it. He said he'd have to check his file. A notary who has to check whether anyone witnessed a will is a notary telling you something. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there a long time, looking at the corner of my desk where I keep the things I can't throw away. And I remembered the business card. 2 years ago, in the lobby, Opal had pressed a card into my hand, just in case, and I'd filed it without a second thought. Margaret Halloran, Estate Law. Before I called the lawyer, I did the reasonable thing. I asked my own family for the truth. I drove to my parents' house and asked to see the actual probate filing, the official one, not Wade's coffee cake folder. My mother's whole face changed. "Why would you need that?" she said. I told her I just wanted to read it. I keep books. Reading documents is what I do. That's when she reached for the weapon she'd used my whole life. She made herself the victim. "I cannot believe you," she said, her voice wobbling. "Your grandmother is barely in the ground and you're already fighting about money." Brooke appeared in the doorway right on cue. "Don't make this ugly, Simone. It's so like you to make everything about you." My father studied the wallpaper. I looked at the three of them and understood something I should have understood years ago. They weren't confused. They weren't grieving wrong. They had a plan, and the plan required me quiet and ashamed and gone. So I went quiet. But not the way they wanted. I drove back to my office and I did not call my mother to apologize, because for once I had nothing to apologize for. They thought they'd handled me. They thought the bookish daughter would fold because she always folded, because keeping the peace had always been my job. What they forgot is what I actually do for a living. I spend my days finding the number somebody tried very hard to hide. I find it in the rounding. I find it in the dates that don't line up. And there was a date that didn't line up, sitting in a will my cousin couldn't explain. So the next morning, I picked up the phone and called Margaret Halloran. Margaret Halloran's assistant put me through the moment I said my grandmother's name. That told me something before the lawyer even spoke. But Margaret was careful on the phone, the way good lawyers are, and asked me to come in person and bring identification. We set it for the following week. In the meantime, I did what I always do when I'm scared. I gathered facts. I learned that the estate was already moving fast. Too fast. My mother had petitioned the court as executor under an informal, uncontested probate, the kind that moves quick when nobody stands up to object. A court reviews a will on its face. It doesn't test a signature unless an heir contests it, and no heir had. The required notice to family had gone to an old mailing address I'd left years back, so it reached me late, after the easy window to object had nearly closed. Margaret never heard a word, because nobody is obligated to notify the attorney who drafted an earlier will. On paper, Wade's document looked clean. The probate had sailed through on the strength of it, and now there was a notice that the farmhouse and land would be sold to settle the estate. Sold. To whoever showed up with money. I drove out to Cedar Hollow Road that evening and parked at the end of the long gravel drive. The house sat there in the blue dusk, Opal's porch swing still hanging crooked the way it always had. I thought about strangers walking those rooms. I thought about someone tearing out her garden to put in a pool, and I made myself a promise right there in the cold. Whatever the law eventually said about that forged signature, it would take months to prove, and the house would be long gone by then. I couldn't stop the sale in time, but there was nothing stopping me from being the one who bought it. If you've ever watched something precious slip toward people who never deserved it, you know exactly the kind of quiet that fell over me. It wasn't defeat. It was a decision. I need to stop here for just a second. If you've ever been the one who showed up, every appointment, every form, every hard night, and then watched the people who vanished decide they'd earned the reward, you already know this feeling in your chest. Stay with me, because what I did next surprised even me. Hit that subscribe button so the rest of this story finds you. People expect rage to look loud. Mine looked like a legal pad. The night I decided to buy the house, I sat at my kitchen table above the office and made a list, because lists are how I think. Down one side I wrote what I knew. The will was almost certainly fake. The sale was almost certainly going through anyway. My family was almost certainly spending money they hadn't received yet. Down the other side I wrote what I could control. Not their behavior. Not the speed of the court. Just my own moves. Made cleanly, made legally, made in the right order. My mother's voice kept circling in my head. You were never in the will anyway. I let it. I didn't push it away. I let it sit there and turn into fuel. Because anger, you understand, is anger you can aim. Then I started reading. I read everything I could find about how estate properties get sold when an executor needs cash, and I found the word that changed everything: auction. The estate wasn't doing a quiet private sale to a pre-picked buyer. To move it fast and prove fairness to the court, the land was headed to a public estate auction. Public. Open to anyone with the funds and the nerve to raise a paddle. My mother thought she was selling her mother-in-law's house to some faceless investor. She had no idea the auction floor would be open to me, too. I sat back and felt something I hadn't felt since the funeral. Not peace, exactly. Purpose. I had a number to find, a plan to build, and for the first time in months, I wasn't the one being handled. I was the one doing math nobody else knew was happening. Margaret Halloran's office smelled like old paper and good coffee. She was a trim woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a handshake that meant it. I put my license on her desk. She looked at it, then at me, and something in her shoulders eased. "You look like her," she said. Then she opened a file 2 inches thick. 2 years ago, she told me, my grandmother had come to her deliberate and clear-headed and drafted a will. It was signed, witnessed by 2 of Margaret's staff, and notarized properly. In it, Opal left the farmhouse and the surrounding 10 acres to me, to Simone. The one who stayed. Margaret read aloud, and I had to look at the window for a moment. The accounts were split among the family. But the house was mine, in black and white, executed the right way. Then I told her about Wade's version, about the steady signature on a dying woman, the 3 weeks before date, the kitchen table reading. Margaret's expression went flat and professional, which is how lawyers look when they're furious. "I drafted the operative will," she said. "Nobody contacted me about a revocation. A valid later will can supersede an earlier one, but it has to be valid." She tapped the file. "If your cousin's document is what you suspect, then the will currently in probate is fraudulent, and everything done under it can be challenged." I asked the obvious question. Where was the original signed copy of her real will? Margaret had a conformed copy in her file, but the executed original, Opal had insisted on keeping herself, in her safe deposit box at the Cedar Hollow Bank. And access to that box, Margaret said, would require the key and the documentation Opal had set aside. A key. A box. I felt the cold tin of a recipe tin against my memory. The next morning, I drove out to the farmhouse one last time before it changed hands. The estate company hadn't locked it yet. I still had the key Opal gave me years ago, the one to the back door that stuck if you didn't lift it. I let myself in, and the smell hit me first, lavender and wood smoke and her. Everything was exactly where she'd left it. I went straight to the kitchen, to the shelf above the stove where the tin recipe box had lived my whole life. I took the little key from my coat pocket, the one she'd pressed into my hand in February, and it fit. Inside, under the index card stained with decades of gravy and pie, I found 2 things. The first was a flat brass key in a small envelope marked, in her handwriting, Cedar Hollow Bank, Box 114. The second was a sealed letter. My name was on the front in her looping cursive. Just Simone. I stood in that kitchen holding both, and my hands, which never shake, shook. I knew what the brass key was for. The bank box. The original will. The thing that could blow my family's whole story apart. But the letter was different. The letter was her voice, and I wasn't ready to hear it yet. So I did something that wasn't entirely rational. I took the bank key and slipped the letter, still sealed, into my bag, and I carried it around for 3 days without opening it. Some truths, once you let them out, you can't fold back up. I think part of me knew that whatever she'd written would ask something of me, and I wanted to be strong enough to do it before I read what it was. While I worked up the nerve to open that letter, I built the thing that would let me fight. I formed a company. Not because I'm cloak and dagger, but because I needed to bid on that house without my mother seeing my name and jacking the price out of spite. So I did what plenty of buyers do, all of it above board. I registered a limited liability company called Cedar Hollow Holdings. On the public records, only the company name would show. The law still required me to report myself as the true owner to the Federal Registry, privately, which I did, because I do everything by the book. But my family, scanning the auction paperwork, would just see a company they'd never heard of. They'd never connect it to the daughter they'd written off. Then came the harder part. Money. The farmhouse and 10 acres had been appraised around $215,000. That is not a fortune in the city, but it is a mountain when you keep books over a hardware store. I'd been careful for 12 years, though. I had real savings in the business. I had a small inheritance from my grandfather that I'd never touched, because Opal told me to save it for something that matters. And I qualified for a mortgage in the company's name to cover the rest. I sat with my own ledgers for 2 nights, stress testing every number, the way I'd never let a client overextend. I could do it. Barely, but cleanly. And there was one more thing in my favor, one cold piece of arithmetic. My mother needed cash, and fast, which meant she'd set the reserve price low to guarantee a quick sale. A low reserve is a door left open. I intended to walk through it. Right in the middle of all that planning, Brooke called to gloat. She didn't know she was gloating. She thought she was sharing good news. She'd put a deposit down on a new SUV. Loaded, she said. Third row, the works. She was paying for it, she explained, out of her share of Grandma's estate, money that hadn't even cleared yet. I asked, mildly, whether that was wise before the sale closed. And that's when she said it, breezy as anything, like it cost her nothing. Oh, come on. If Grandma had left it to you, you'd just waste it on that dusty little office. There it was. The same sentence my mother had used at the will reading, in a slightly different dress. You'd just waste it. As if the 8 years I'd spent driving out to that farmhouse were the waste. As if keeping someone's books and someone's company and someone's dignity intact at the end of her life were nothing. I felt the old urge to defend myself, to list every appointment and every form, to make her understand. I didn't. I'd finally learned that you don't explain your worth to people who've already decided you don't have any. So I just said, we'll see. There was a little pause on the line, like she expected more of a fight and didn't know what to do without one. Anyway, she said, and changed the subject to upholstery. After we hung up, I sat with my tea going cold and I thought about the auction, now 11 days away. I thought about Brooke signing for a car with money that was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. And for the first time, I let myself smile about it. Just a little. Just in the privacy of my own kitchen. The night before I met Margaret to plan the bank box, I finally opened my grandmother's letter. I made tea I didn't drink and sat in the chair by the window and slid my thumb under the seal. Her handwriting filled 2 pages, steady where her last forged signature had been suspiciously steadier. She wrote like she talked. No wasted words. She told me she knew. She knew Sharon was underwater. Knew about the second mortgage and the failed ventures. Knew that when she was gone there would be hands reaching for the house before the flowers wilted. I've watched it coming for years, she wrote. Your mother loves money the way some people love whiskey, and she will tell herself any story to get it. Then she told me what she'd done. The real will, in the bank box, with Margaret's name on it. The house, left to me, on purpose, in writing. And then the line that I have read so many times I could recite it in my sleep. If they ever tell you that you were never in my will, you put this letter on the table and you let the paper speak. Don't fight them with shouting, Simone. You were never any good at it, and it isn't your strength. Numbers are your strength. Quiet is your strength. The house goes to the one who stayed. That's you. It was always you. I sat there a long time. Then it came. Not the pretty way people cry in movies, but the ugly, hiccuping kind that arrives when someone reaches out from past death and tells you they saw you all along. Then I wiped my face, folded the letter back along its worn creases, and put it somewhere safe. Because now I wasn't just buying back a house. I was carrying out the last clear instruction of the only person who ever believed me. Let the paper speak. 2 days later, Margaret and I opened safe deposit box 114 at the Cedar Hollow Bank. Opal had thought of this part too. Years earlier, she'd quietly added me to the box as a co-lessee, my signature already on file with the bank, so the box never froze when she died, and I could open it without waiting on any court. The brass key was mine to use. Inside was a slim folder, and inside that, the executed original of her real will, signatures and seals intact, witnessed and dated 2 years back. Margaret laid it beside a copy of Wade's version on the bank's little conference table and put her glasses on. She didn't say much for a while. Then she started pointing. The dates. The witness lines, which on Wade's copy named two people no one could quite locate. The signature itself, which Margaret called a careful imitation by someone who'd seen the real thing. She'd seen forged documents before, she said, and they almost always made the same mistake. They tried too hard to look perfect. A genuine signature from a sick woman wobbles, she said. This one marches. She explained the path forward in plain terms. We could file to reopen the probate, present the original will, and allege fraud. If the court agreed, the fraudulent will would be thrown out, and everything done under it could be challenged. But, she warned, that road was slow. Months, maybe a year, with my family fighting every step. And in the meantime, the auction would happen on schedule. The house would sell. So we fight on two fronts, I said. She raised an eyebrow. I told her my plan. Form the company, buy the house clean at auction, then pursue the fraud case to make the rest of the truth land where it belonged. Margaret took off her glasses, looked at me for a long moment, and almost smiled. Your grandmother, she said, would have liked that very much. Then she picked up her pen, and we got to work. The auction was held on a cold October morning in the county building, in a meeting room with folding chairs and burnt coffee. I didn't go in person. That was the whole point. Instead, I sent the one person who could bid without a single eyebrow going up, a calm associate from Margaret's office, there to represent Cedar Hollow Holdings, with my hard limit written on a card in his pocket. I sat in my car in the parking lot with my phone in my hand and my heart in my throat. My mother and Brooke were inside. I'd seen them go in, dressed up, already celebrating. Margaret's associate texted me updates. Bidding opened low, just like I'd predicted. The reserve set cheap for a fast sale. Then it climbed. A local farmer wanting the acreage, an investor from the city, and the quiet man in the good suit who kept nodding, raising the company's number, patient as a Tuesday. The price passed $200,000. Past 220. My family, I learned later, was thrilled. Every raise was more cash for them, and they had no idea who was driving it up or why. At $238,000, the room went still, the gavel came down, and the farmhouse on Cedar Hollow Road belonged to Cedar Hollow Holdings, LLC. My phone buzzed. Sold to your company. Congratulations, Ms. Finch. I sat in that cold car and pressed my hand over my mouth and made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. My mother walked out of that building a few minutes later, beaming, counting money in her head, complaining to Brooke about that pushy company that bid us up. She passed within 30 feet of my car and never looked over. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd sold her mother-in-law's house to a stranger for top dollar. She had no idea she'd just sold it back to the granddaughter she swore was never in the will. The money moved the way money moves when people are desperate to spend it. My mother took the largest share, and I'd find out later most of it went straight to the second mortgage and the debts she'd been hiding from my father for years. Brooke finished paying off her SUV and booked a vacation. My father took whatever was handed to him and said thank you to no one. They divided the proceeds at a celebration dinner I wasn't invited to, which suited me fine, because every dollar they passed across that table was a dollar I had paid. I sat in my office above the hardware store the night the funds cleared, and I laid the new deed on my desk under the lamp. Cedar Hollow Holdings, LLC, owner of record, the farmhouse, and 10 acres on Cedar Hollow Road. My company, my house, my grandmother's house, back where it belonged, and not one of them knew. I want to be honest with you about something, because this is the part people get wrong. I did not feel triumphant that night. I felt tired, and I felt sad. And I felt a strange tenderness for the woman who raised me, who'd seen this whole thing coming and armed me for it from beyond the grave. The triumph would come later. That night was just quiet. I traced the address on the deed with one finger and thought about the porch swing and the garden gone to weeds. They were spending my money to celebrate cutting me out of the family, and I let them. I let every check clear and every bottle get uncorked. Because Christmas was coming, and my mother, who could never resist an audience, was about to gather the whole family at one table. I would bring a hostess gift. 3 pieces of paper. The invitation came in early December and it surprised me. My mother called sweet as pie to invite me to Christmas dinner. Not because she missed me. I knew her too well for that. She invited me for 2 reasons, and I could hear both of them under her cheerful voice. The first was theater. Nothing said, "This family has moved on, no hard feelings, nothing to see here," like the prodigal bookkeeper at the holiday table. The second was nerves. There had been a whisper around town that some company had been asking questions about the estate, requesting records, and my mother wanted to make sure I wasn't stirring a pot that might splash on her. So she wrapped a leash in tinsel and called it an invitation. "You'll come, won't you?" she said. "It's Christmas. Let's put all this behind us." Then, because she couldn't help herself, because cruelty was a reflex she'd never learned to suppress, she added a little reminder. "And let's not have any drama about the house, You know you were never in the will. Don't go ruining everyone's Christmas over it." I held the phone and looked out my office window at the Christmas lights strung over Main Street. I thought about Margaret's filing, drafted and ready to go the week after the holiday. I thought about the deed in my desk drawer and the letter in my bag. And I thought, you have no idea what you're inviting into your dining room. "I'll be there," I said warmly. "What can I bring?" She told me just myself. I told her I'd bring myself, and I meant it. And I also meant the slim leather folder that would be tucked in my purse beside the cranberry sauce. I said yes. I'd bring something to the table, all right. I'd be lying if I told you I didn't wrestle with it. For a week I went back and forth about how to do this, because how you win matters as much as whether you win. I could have done it cleanly and privately. I could have let Margaret's lawsuit land in January with no fanfare, served papers through an attorney, never said a word at dinner. Part of me, the part Opal called my good quiet, wanted that. It felt more dignified. But there was another truth I had to be honest about. They had shamed me in public. At the will reading, at the funeral, at every holiday for years, they'd made me small in front of an audience. And they'd done it on purpose, because an audience made it stick. The smirk only worked because other people were watching. So maybe the truth deserved the same room the lies had used. I pulled out Opal's letter and read it again. Don't fight them with shouting. Let the paper speak. And there it was, my answer, in her hand. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw wine or make a scene or say the cruel things I'd rehearsed in the shower. I was going to sit at that table, calm as a frozen pond, and set 3 documents down and let them do the talking. No raised voice, no insults, just facts, laid in order, the way I lay out a ledger. That week I signed the authorization for Margaret to file the petition to reopen probate the first business day after Christmas. The legal machinery was set. The dinner would just be the moment the family learned the truth from me instead of from a process server. I picked out what I'd wear. Something plain. Something Opal would have called sensible. The thing about a lie with more than one person in it is that it's only as strong as its most frightened member. And Wade was getting frightened. I heard about it secondhand, then saw it for myself. Word had reached him that a company had requested the full estate file from the county, including the probate documents and the will he'd notarized. To a crooked notary, that is the sound of a floor creaking in a house he thought was empty. Wade called my mother in a panic. I know because I happened to stop by my parents on a pretext 2 days before Christmas, dropping off a poinsettia like a good daughter, and I heard her on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and sharp. "Stop calling here," she hissed. "Nobody is investigating anything. You did your job. You got paid. Now act normal." A pause. "Because if you fall apart, Wade, you take all of us down, including yourself. So get a hold of yourself." She hung up hard. I stood in the hallway with my poinsettia and my pleasant face and filed the whole thing away. So Wade had been paid. She'd said it herself. You got paid. A notary doesn't get a special fee for honest work. The price list is posted on the wall. Wade had been paid for something else. The fraud wasn't just real, it was already cracking from the inside, and my mother was holding it together with threats. I drove home through the Christmas lights thinking that I might not even need to push very hard. People who build their houses out of lies spend all their energy bracing the walls. Sometimes all the truth has to do is knock politely and wait. 2 more days. I could wait 2 more days. In a small town, a farmhouse changing hands is news, and people had started to talk. At the grocery, at the feed store, at the post office, folks asked me sideways questions, the way you do when you're fishing. Who'd bought the old Finch place? Was it going to be torn down? Some developer. Somebody heard. I kept my face neutral and said I didn't know much, which felt strange, lying by omission to neighbors who'd loved Opal. But one moment cut through me. I was at the hardware store downstairs from my office when old Mr. Petrie, who'd farmed beside my grandmother for 40 years, stopped me by the nails. I heard whoever bought Opal's place means to keep her garden, he said, voice rough. Heard they're not tearing anything down. That true? Somebody at the title company must have talked. I looked at him and I couldn't lie about that one. It's true, I said. The garden stays. His old eyes went bright and he gripped my arm. Good, he said. She'd be glad. That woman loved her tomatoes more than most people love their kin. Then he went back to his nails and I stood there blinking. Because that was the whole thing, wasn't it? That was why I'd drained my savings and mortgaged my future and built a company with a careful name. Not to ruin my family. Not even, really, to win. I bought that house to keep a promise. To keep her garden in the ground and her name on the land and her porch swing creaking in the same crooked way it always had. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was almost a side effect. The real thing was simpler. Somebody in this family was going to remember the woman, not just the money. And it was going to be me. The night before Christmas Eve, I sat at my kitchen table and got my folder ready. I have done this for clients 100 times, assembled the documents that tell a true story in the right order. I'd never done it for myself before. I laid out 3 pieces of paper. The first was a copy of the deed. Cedar Hollow Holdings, LLC, owner of record, the farmhouse and 10 acres, dated the day of the auction. The second was the conformed copy of my grandmother's real will, Margaret's seal in the corner, my name in the body. The house goes to my granddaughter, Simone, the one who stayed. The third was Opal's letter, the one in her own hand, the one that said, "Let the paper speak." I slid each into the leather folder in the order I'd reveal them. Deed first, to show I owned it. Will second, to show it was always meant to be mine. Letter last, because the letter was the heart, and you save the heart for the end. I sat back and looked at the little stack. 3 pages. 1 quiet sentence to go with them. Already chosen. Already rehearsed until it had no shake left in it. That's all it would take to turn my mother's victory dinner into the worst night of her life. I won't pretend my hand didn't hover over that deed for a long moment. Once I set this down, there was no picking it back up. No going back to being the daughter who kept the peace. I'd be the daughter who told the truth, and they would never forgive me for it. I closed the folder. I'd made my peace with that price weeks ago. Some things are worth not being forgiven for. I went to bed and, to my own surprise, slept like a stone. On Christmas Eve, my father did something he had never once done in my life. He came to me. I was closing up the office when I saw his truck idling at the curb, exhaust pluming in the cold. He came up the stairs slow, hat in his hands, and stood in my doorway looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Your grandmother," he started, then stopped. He tried again. "There were papers I signed, as part of the probate." He turned the hat in his hands. I didn't read them close. I should have read them close. It was as near to a confession as Raymond Finch had in him. I waited, because I'd learned that men like my father say the real thing only in the silence you leave for it. "Wade put it in front of me," he said finally. Your mother said it was just formalities. I knew something wasn't right about it. I signed anyway. There it was. He knew. Not every detail maybe, but enough. He'd known something was wrong, and he'd chosen the easy quiet over his own daughter, the same as he always had. I felt the old ache and, under it, something steadier. I didn't yell. I didn't absolve him either. I know you did, Dad, I said. He flinched like I'd struck him, which was more honest than anything I could have shouted. He stood there a moment longer, hoping I'd make it easier for him, hoping I'd say it was all right. I didn't. Because it wasn't. He nodded once, put his hat back on, and went down the stairs. I watched his taillights disappear and thought, tomorrow you'll learn the rest. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Christmas Day, I dressed in the plain sweater Opal would have approved of and drove across town to my parents' house. It's not far, the town being what it is, maybe 10 minutes from my place above the office to their ranch house on the nice side of the school. I made the drive I'd made 1,000 times, past the same lit-up lawns and inflatable snowmen, and I was calm in a way that surprised me. The folder sat in my purse on the passenger seat. I didn't rehearse anything on the way. I'd done all my rehearsing. Now I just drove, and watched the town go by, and let myself feel the weight of what I was about to do settle into something solid. I thought about Opal teaching me to add the columns out loud at her kitchen table. Numbers don't lie, Simone. People do. I thought about how long I'd let people lie about me, to my face, in front of others, and how I'd swallowed it for the sake of a peace that only ever protected them. That was over. I parked behind Brooke's enormous new SUV, the one she'd bought with my money, and I sat for one breath with my hands on the wheel. Then I picked up my purse, felt the corner of the folder press against my palm, and walked up the path to the door where I could already hear them laughing inside. Before we go in, let me ask you something. If a story has ever reminded you that dignity can be louder than shouting, do me a favor and comment, the one who stayed, so I know you're still with me. Now, let's go to dinner. The dining room was warm and bright, and smelled like a holiday should, pine and roast and cinnamon. My mother had outdone herself, the good china out, candles lit, a centerpiece of red and gold. The whole cast was there. My father at the foot of the table, quiet. Brooke and her husband, Travis, near the middle, already a glass of wine in. My Uncle Gary and his wife. And, to my private satisfaction, Wade, sweating slightly in a sweater, parked near the end like a man who wanted to be close to the door. My mother presided at the head, glowing, refilling glasses, queen of a kingdom she thought was secure. She greeted me with a hug that was all performance, and seated me on her right, the place of honor, so everyone could see how gracious she was being to the difficult daughter. I let her. I complimented the table. I passed the rolls. I asked Travis about his job and admired the tree. I was, by every account, a perfectly pleasant dinner guest. Inside, I was as still as I've ever been. We ate. We toasted the season. And then, between the main course and the pie, my mother tapped her glass with her fork and said she had a little announcement to make, a bit of family news worth celebrating. Here we go, I thought. Here we go. My mother stood, wine glass raised, and the table quieted for her the way it always did. I just want to say, she began, what a hard year it's been, losing Mother Finch. She pressed a hand to her chest. But we got through it together, as a family, and I'm happy to share that we finally closed the sale of her house last month. It's done. We can all move forward now. Glasses lifted around the table. Brooke said, "Cheers, Mom." Then my mother's eyes slid to me, and the smirk came out, the one I'd been waiting for, the one that needed an audience to work. I know that's been a sore spot for some, she said lightly, swirling her wine, looking right at me. But honestly, sweetheart, you were never in the will anyway. There's no shame in it. Grandma just knew who'd handle things responsibly. A few uncomfortable chuckles. Travis studied his plate. My father went very still. The whole table waited to see if I'd cry or argue or slink off the way I always had. the way I was supposed to. I set down my fork. I didn't reach for my folder yet. Not yet. I just looked at my mother and let a small silence stretch, the kind that makes confident people start to wonder. Brooke, who never could stand a silence, rushed to fill it. She laughed, that bright, careless laugh she'd had since we were kids, and she lifted her own glass toward me like she was doing me a kindness. "Don't feel bad, Simone," she said. "Honestly, it's for the best. Good. You'd just have wasted it." There it was again. The second knife, the matching one. "You'd just waste it." Said in front of everyone, on Christmas with a smile, like it was a thing you could say to your sister between the turkey and the pie. Travis murmured, "Brooke, come on." But she waved him off, pleased with herself. My uncle shifted in his seat. Wade reached for his water and missed the glass on the first try. And I sat there in the place of honor, on my mother's right hand, and felt the last bit of hesitation leave my body. They'd had their say, both of them, in public, on the record, in front of every witness at that table. They'd made themselves perfectly clear. I picked up my napkin, folded it, and set it beside my plate, slow and deliberate, the way Opal used to when she'd decided a conversation was finished. Then I reached for my wine. I took a sip of wine. One, unhurried, while the table watched. Then I set the glass down and asked my mother a simple question, in the same pleasant voice I'd used about the rolls. "Can I ask who you sold it to?" She blinked, thrown by how calm I was. "What?" "The house," I said. "Who bought it?" She recovered because she loved telling this part. "Some company," she said, with a little wave. "Cedar Hollow Holdings, I think. An investment outfit. They bid us up nicely, actually. Paid well over what we expected." She smiled around the table, collecting her admiration. "So really, it worked out for everyone." "Cedar Hollow Holdings," I repeated, like I was making sure I had it right. "That's right," she said. "Why?" I felt the whole strange year arrive at this single point, the funeral and the forged will, and the cold car in the auction parking lot, all of it funneling down to the next 60 seconds. Around me the candles flickered and the pie sat cooling and 11 people waited without knowing what they were waiting for. I reached down into my purse and my hand closed around the leather folder, and I brought it up and set it on the table beside my plate. I opened the folder and took out the first page. "This is the deed to Grandma's house," I said, and laid it in the center of the table, turned so my mother could read it. "Recorded the day of the auction." She glanced down, impatient, then her eyes caught on the owner's name and stopped. "Cedar Hollow Holdings, LLC. "I don't understand," she said, but her voice had changed. I took out the second page. "This is Grandma's will," I said. "Her real one, drafted 2 years ago by Margaret Halloran, signed, witnessed, and notarized properly." I set it beside the deed. "It leaves the farmhouse and 10 acres to me, by name." The color was leaving my mother's face now, draining down like someone had pulled a plug. Brooke leaned in to read and went quiet. Wade pushed his chair back from the table. I took out the third page last and I held it for a moment before I set it down, because this one was hers, in her hand. "And this," I said, "is the letter she left me, the one that told me exactly what you'd do." The table had gone so quiet I could hear the candles. Every eye moved from the papers, to my mother, to me. I folded my hands and let them look. My mother looked up from the papers, and for once in her life she had nothing to say, so I said it for her, in a voice as level as a countertop. "Cool," I said. "I hope you enjoy the cash." A beat. "Since I'm the one who bought it." The words landed soft and detonated slow. "Cedar Hollow Holdings is mine," I said. "I formed it. I bid on it. The money you all spent this fall, the mortgage, the SUV, the vacation, that was my money. I bought Grandma's house back from you, and not one of you noticed." My mother's mouth opened and closed. Then she found her voice, and it came out the way I knew it would. Loud, scrambling, furious. "That's a lie," she said, half standing, her wine tipping and bleeding across the white cloth. That's not. Wade, tell her. Tell her that will isn't real. But Wade was already on his feet, gray as ash, backing toward the door, muttering that he had to go, that he wasn't part of this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I just put one hand flat on Opal's letter and looked at my mother across the ruined tablecloth. You said I was never in the will, I said. You were right, because the one I was in, you replaced. And I have the original. The candles burned, nobody moved. The table went silent. Not the polite silence of a lull, but the deep ringing silence of a room where everyone has understood something at the same instant and no one wants to be the first to speak. Brooke had gone the color of the tablecloth. I watched her do the arithmetic, watched it cross her face as she realized the giant SUV in the driveway had been bought with money that was about to be clawed back, money that had never really been hers. Her hand drifted off her wineglass. My father had his eyes shut. My uncle stared at his plate like it might tell him what to do, and I looked at my sister, who had laughed and said I'd waste it, and I gave her the only answer that mattered. Turns out I didn't waste it, I said quietly. I bought back the only thing in this family that was ever worth keeping. Somewhere in the kitchen, the oven timer went off for the second pie, cheerful and absurd, and nobody got up to answer it. I didn't stay for pie. I gathered my 3 pages back into their folder, thanked my mother for dinner with a courtesy that landed harder than any insult, and I drove home through the Christmas lights with my hands steady on the wheel. The rest happened the way Margaret said it would, just faster. Because a lie cracks quickest once everyone can see it. She filed the petition to reopen probate the first business day after the holiday. We presented the original will and the evidence of the forgery, and the court took it seriously. Wade's notary commission came under review within weeks. Faced with losing his license and worse, he stopped pretending he'd done anything proper, and the document he'd notarized fell apart under the first real scrutiny. With the fraudulent will discredited, the court reopened the estate under Opal's real will, the one that left the house to me. My purchase at the public auction stood on its own. I'd bought it at arm's length, at market price, as an honest buyer. And a court won't claw a house back from a clean, good-faith sale. What got unwound was the money. The cash my family had split came out of an estate they'd emptied with a forged document, and the court ordered it returned. My mother, who had already spent her share covering the debts she'd hidden for years, now owed it back with nowhere to get it, and the whole careful image she'd built for the town came down in public, which to her was the worst part of all. Brooke had to sell the new SUV to scrape together her piece of what was owed back. My father moved into the spare room and, last I heard, was sleeping poorly. I took no joy in the hard parts. I want you to believe that. But I took no responsibility for them either, because I didn't forge anything, and I didn't lie, and I didn't reach for $1 that wasn't mine. As for me, I kept the house. Both ways it turned out, the way I'd planned and the way the law decided. The auction had made me the owner. The real will made me the heir. 2 different roads, the same front door. That spring I drove out to Cedar Hollow Road, fixed the crooked porch swing, and turned the soil in Opal's garden with my own hands. Mr. Petrie came by with tomato starts and didn't say much, which was its own kind of blessing. I left the door open for my father once, with a single condition. It's open, I told him, when you're ready to be honest. He hasn't come yet. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. Either way, the garden's in, and the swing creaks the way it always did. Here's the thing I learned, sitting in that quiet house that used to be hers. Family can vote you out of the story all they want, but the people who actually stay are the ones who get to keep the house, and the name, and the truth. That's where I'll leave it tonight. The smirk, the toast, the 3 pieces of paper on the Christmas tablecloth. If you've ever been the one who stayed while others showed up only to collect, then this story was for you. So do one quiet thing for me this week. Go check the paperwork on the things that matter, the deeds and the wills and the promises, gently and early, long before you ever have to raise your voice. Comment, the one who stayed, if you made it to the end with me. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Calm Drama Stories, because there's always another family, and another table, and another truth waiting to be set down.